if the 2022 cars can race closely due to the new aero rigs, they should ban DRS. And how about, okay, well, let's look at that first point. You're absolutely right. And I made that point in the last video. And the reason they're not is not because they just think they're going to continue with DRS forevermore. It's that the teams don't know yet whether the new aero rigs are really going to work. It's one thing to be looking at it on the CFD or in the wind tunnel and say, yeah, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. The car behind is going to be less effective. There's going to be less turbulence out the back of the car in front, etc., etc. It's one thing to say all that and look at all the data. It's another thing actually to be seeing that in real life. And until that is clear, they're going to keep DRS in play. That is definitely why they're keeping DRS at the moment. How about a device that cuts power by 30% for a lap when a driver exceeds track limits? Yeah, well, I mean, they're fairly good on track limit policing now, are they not? I mean, again, I did a big video after that Formula 3 shunt. We had Alex Peroni's shunt at Monza a couple of years ago when he hit the sausage curb and it launched him, and you know, he was very lucky to escape with his life from that accident. And I said then, you know, why don't we have more sensors? It's all the technologies there, thanks to Jonathan Palmer and what he'd been doing in the UK. And I think we have had a lot more sensors built into those runoff areas now, and they do work pretty well as far as I can see. But what you're saying is there should be a bigger penalty or a different penalty if they go over the track limit, i.e. 30% cut in power. Yeah, well, I can't imagine any of the teams agreeing to that. But anyway, so yeah, it'd be good to see. More draconian in that area, the better, I think. And yes, ban the teams from speaking to the race director during the race. Yeah, well, I'm glad you agree with that. Quite a lot of people have said that because it is ludicrous that they're all using it as a platform just to sort of get their opinion across and try and get the fans to go along their way of thinking. And we saw a lot of that, didn't we, on that first lap in Abu Dhabi when the whole Max Lewis thing happened and Max was clearly ahead. What was Lewis doing cutting across? All this stuff. You could argue that it's quite. I would rather see, as I've said before, I would rather see the driver's briefing live coverage on TV, reality TV, and I'd rather see all the discussions that take place in the cars driving home from the track or driving to the track the next morning. Actually, that would be a lot more revealing than anything else we've ever had. Random Task, there's another good name. I'm sure that's probably not your original name, but anyway, we'll go on. What about the Formula 1 drivers competing in a season-long kart championship for charity? 100% correct. Now, whether that should be over the Grand Prix weekend, I think it should. I think we should bring back, it wasn't that long ago, and I'm not going to take credit for this because I'm sure others were involved, but it wasn't that long ago that it was in Bernie era, I was moaning and groaning about how slovenly the drivers were on the grid when the national anthem was being played for that country, and they were all just standing around doing whatever they do, doing nothing really, just sloping around, not paying any attention at all to the national anthem. That has now been addressed, and we now have all the teams and the personnel standing correctly to attention, well, most of the time correctly to attention during the national anthem. So that's a good thing. I've also been saying for a long time that the drivers, particularly in the dead period over the winter, should be doing more to promote Formula One in the countries which really need it. United States, China, India, any new country that's trying to come into Formula One, Russia probably, and they should be going out and doing charity kart races. But then again, equally, why not go back to having what we used to have? I'm not saying we should stay around after the race, but on the Thursday night, what's wrong with having some massive, great gala in every town, city in which we race, in which all the drivers attend, and we have some sort of indoor kart race, which goes on throughout the year with points? I think it'd be brilliant. It'd be great to see that. But of course, it'll never happen because some teams won't agree to it, and that'll be that. Anyway, thank you for that. But next question. What are your thoughts on virtual grid lines penalised either by a power reduction for a lap? Everybody's into getting more draconian penalties, or maybe cancelling DRS for a sector. There's too much data for race control to process in minimum time. Many rules can now be decided by computers, thus avoiding discussion. Pura Lenya. I'm not sure there's a big issue. Is there about starting? I mean, they have the timing beam now and they pull up alongside that. And I think if somebody jumps that or doesn't pull up correctly, Pierre Gasly, please note, then I think it's pretty clear. And I'm not sure it's beyond human ability to look at that. And it's all pretty clear. And I would say in this case, probably you don't want to have a computer involved in that sort of stuff because computers can always go wrong. But there's not that much incident these days of drivers jumping the start. The start procedure is pretty well thought through and bulletproof. And if a driver does so, it very clearly shows it on the timing. So yeah, thanks for that idea. But as for cancelling DRS for a sector, if you do something wrong, that's not a bad idea though. It's quite a good penalty, that one, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, it may not make much difference, of course, with the 2022 cars. Chris Orr, I like the sprint race idea, but I think they should be completely separate from the race proper. Grand Prix qualifying and the race should take place as normal. But how about sprint qualifying being the FP2 times and the sprint race taking place on Friday afternoon? Yeah, I think I may be wrong here because I'm not massively into this whole business of we've got to make it more interesting for the fans, because I think it is already. But I think they think that it's Saturday and Sunday they need to spruce up and not Friday, and they don't really care about Friday. I'm talking about they, Liberty, etc. And so that's why they put the sprint race on, to try and make Saturday more of a thing day and bring more fans in through the gate on a Saturday. So sadly, I don't think that's going to be a thing, purely because they're not interested in Fridays anymore. But anyway, thanks for that, Chris. Next one, Ian Roberts. I've been looking for an answer to this for many years. When the cars are told to unlap themselves in safety car conditions, why can't they just pass through the pit lane? That's the unlap car, the lap cars, that is. In a matter of a few meters, this would automatically bring them to the back in the correct order, Ian Roberts. Well, I know the answer to that, and that is a very good idea, Ian, and well spotted. As I say, you've all got very good brains. But the reason they don't do that, and it was discussed initially when this whole business of lapped and unlapped cars behind the safety car came into focus. The reason they don't do that is because the timing system they have wouldn't be able to cope with such a complication. Hard to believe, but that will give you some idea of a little bit of the wall, if that's the right word. It's probably a transparent wall between FOM, who do the timing system, and Liberty, the FIA, who do the rest of it. FOM do timing system and TV, and the timing system is linked to the whole TV coverage. And at the moment, the timing system wouldn't be able to cope with that sort of nuance. It's not a complication, it's just a nuance. And the hope is that the timing system will be continually upgraded, and I think it is being upgraded, and we might see that happening in the future. Probably not this year, but certainly 23, I would think they'll be looking into that. It is a very neat solution to the whole thing. Having said all of that, you're looking at a guy who wonders why we have all this stuff in the first place. Why do we care if the lap cars have to unlap themselves? Why do we want them to unlap themselves? What's that all about? I never understood that. If they're a lap behind, they're a lap behind. It's their problem. The safety car needs to go out in front of the race leader, and if there's then 5 cars in between the leader and the guy in P2, tough. That's the race as the safety car came out. I don't understand why we do this. And if we hadn't had that rule, Mercedes might well have brought Lewis in. I mean, one of the reasons they didn't bring Lewis in was because there were those cars between Lewis and Max. So, I think it's an odd thing that it's kind of copying what's going on in the United States, I think, but it's very different in IndyCar, where they have a white line. And particularly on ovals, it's very easy for the unlapped cars just to go around and come around to the back of the grid. But you can't really do that on a lot of circuits. I mean, try doing that at Monte Carlo. So the whole thing is, I think we need to relook at this whole business of lapped and unlapped cars. I'm sorry, but if you're at the back of the field and you've been lapped, you're at the back of the field and you've been lapped. Why do you deserve another chance at a restart? I think it's all got tacked onto the back of this whole business of we've got to make racing easier for the cars at the back of the grid. It's got to be cheaper. Cars have got to be have more common parts. And let's have more, midfield racing. I think it's all tucked into the back of that, but I just don't go along with that. It's survival of the fittest, in my view. But anyway, Martin Day. It'd be good to have your thoughts on the coming season. Well, I think that's another video, Martin, and I will do another video about that. And I will do another video that includes another question we had in here, which said, Jim Clark, 1965, Peter, please advise, or thoughts, please. Edward Henry, that came from. Very happy to do that one too. That is going to be a mega comment, so I'll do that. And a few others as well that have come up. But just as a taster of the things that I learnt in going through these 62 motorsports and reading them word for word. One thing is Dennis Jenkins, and that is, and I keep referring to him because he is, he is the man. He started Formula One, really, in terms of how we should perceive it, the books he wrote, The Racing Driver, etc., and how we should look at drivers and the sport in general. Complete and utter purist. And I love reading his stuff purely for that reason, to bring you back down to reality. And two things are very clear in Jenks's mind. One is that he very rarely refers to Formula One or F1, occasionally, but he's always talking about Grand Prix cars and Grand Prix races. And it's quite interesting, if you go through the 62 season, the way he covers it, that he gives just as much space, if not more, I think, to say the Brussels Grand Prix or the Po Grand Prix, both of which were non-championship races, as he did to the Dutch Grand Prix, which was the opening round of the championship that year. All got the same amount of space, all were just as important. The Dutch Grand Prix was a grande épreuve, but the Po Grand Prix was no less important because it wasn't a round of the championship. And that was one thing. And then he does make the point several times, as I said in the previous videos, that the championship can actually be detrimental to the race on the day. And he uses Stirling Moss as a classic example of that. So that's one thing that came through, well, two things really. The other thing was, and this I never ever knew, that the Lotus 25, which was the monocoque chassis that Lotus introduced, surprising everybody, particularly their customers, all of whom have bought the space frame Lotus 24, that Lotus introduced for the Dutch Grand Prix, and with which Jim Clark almost won the World Championship in '62. Did you know, and excuse me if you did, just showing my ignorance because I didn't, that car was originally going to have a column gear change mounted on the column, like the old road cars with the column gear shift, because there wasn't, Colin Chapman didn't think there was going to be enough room in the cockpit to actually have the normal stick shift down on the right-hand side. And Jim Clark was quite prepared to drive it with this column shift. Amazing, eh? We talk about Adrian Newey being incredibly, Adrian Newey creating cockpits that are not designed for driver comfort, more designed for aerodynamic efficiency, and very tight usually, or were until the new templates came in. But Colin Chapman was thinking that way long before Adrian. It's probably why Adrian was, actually, because I know he's a massive fan of Colin. That was one thing. And the other was that, again, a bit like Adrian, really, I suppose, in the racing he does in various cars, Lotus 49Bs, and, he's done a lot of stuff, hasn't he? GT40s. That Colin Chapman, in the middle of the '62 Formula One season, took part in the 6-hour relay race at Silverstone in a Lotus 7. And his team, I think they finished about 4th. They were really quick. They had some sort of drama. But there's Colin Chapman racing a Lotus 7 in the middle of the '62 Formula One World Championship, with Jimmy winning, races. Actually, one other thing I should say there. I didn't realise that Jim Clark hadn't re-signed to drive for Lotus in '62 by the time of the racing car show, which was in December at Olympia. I assumed that Chapman had already re-signed him, and then Innes Island won the US Grand Prix. And despite winning it, Chapman then sacked Innes, knowing that he had Jimmy as his #1 driver with Trevor Taylor for '62. But that wasn't the case. Actually, by the end of the US Grand Prix, Chapman didn't have either driver under contract, neither Clark nor Island. And he didn't sign Jimmy until after, till very late December for '62, at which point then Jimmy he did the South African series. Going back to South Africa, a bit of synergy here, isn't it? He did the Springbok series in the Formula One Lotus 21 with Trevor Taylor as his teammate. And Stirling Moss, brilliant, was out there as well. And, great racing for the South Africans. And that was the Springbok series. It wasn't championship or anything else. And it wasn't until after that series, when Jimmy got back to Europe, that he got the details of what the new Lotus 25 was all about and agreed that, well, if I have to have a column shift, I will. Can you imagine it? It wasn't paddle shift. It was like this, but then you put your hand around the back of the wheel. Amazing. Anyway, that was that lot. Do some more very soon. Take care.